Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today we actually have some news to talk about. It's nice to do a news video again for the first time in a while. I'm going to be talking about the impact of the Isaiah Todd, Jalen Green, G League, NCAA situation, and it's going to be different than a lot of the other takes you're going to see from a lot of other people. So I'm excited to get into it, and I definitely have a lot of thoughts. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy these types of videos and the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload every single day. Okay, so one thing that I have to get out of the way in the beginning of this video is this idea that was floating around Twitter yesterday, that this news, which I'll get into what it means more specifically later on, but this news of Jalen Green and Isaiah Todd skipping college to go play in the G League, that means the end of college basketball and the end of the NCAA. And the NCAA has been continually vilified, and rightfully so for the most part, for the last couple of years. Everybody's hopping on this bandwagon of screw the NCAA, it shouldn't exist anymore, these athletes should be compensated more fairly, which the compensation part is absolutely true. But if you are one of these people that think that this news and these two players going to the G League means that this is the end of college basketball and it's going to ruin the NCAA, or honestly even have that big of an impact on the NCAA as a whole, you simply haven't thought this all the way through. And there's an argument to be made that this is actually a good thing for college basketball and the NCAA. I had to get that part out of the way. Okay, with that part said, let's talk about the situation as a whole. So essentially what's happening here is two really good high school players, like elite high school prospects that would have been eligible for the draft in 2021, decided not to go to college. Jalen Green and Isaiah Todd are two of the better players in the 2020 high school class that would have gone to school and then been eligible for the 2021 draft. But instead, they decided to sign with a G League team. Not any team specifically, but just essentially an AAU team of sorts that the G League is going to put together for these elite level prospects so that they can develop, they can play against G League talent, they can focus all their efforts on being the best basketball players they can be over the next 9 months, and then declare for the draft next year. Now, the compensation details are kind of going all over the place. We do know that for Jalen Green, at least, he's getting paid at least $500,000 in salary, and then obviously the opportunity to get endorsements and shoe deals and things like that. These guys are going to make plenty of money in this 1 year, certainly compared to what they would have been compensated for had they gone to school. So let's first talk about this for the kids, for the players, then we'll talk about the NBA, the NCAA, the whole thing. So for the players, for these kinds of elite high school recruits, guys are like top 10 high school recruits, there's really no downside to taking this G League option unless they are one of the very few players that just feel so strongly about playing in college that they don't want to miss that experience, right? The compensation is obviously much better. You can say what you want about the cost of a college education when you're getting paid what is reportedly going to be upwards of $1 million in compensation compared to, the scholarship you would receive to play at school and some of the other compensation there as well. Obviously, they're getting paid a lot more, and reportedly Jalen Green is also getting the opportunity to get a scholarship to whichever school he wants to go to later on down the road as part of his G League compensation. And beyond that, it's also being a part of a professional environment, being developed specifically for the NBA draft rather than, learning how to set pin down screens for Michigan. Like, these guys are specifically learning how to develop their own game, how to work on their jump shot, how to play in an NBA environment. They're playing against players that are simply better as well. And everything about this situation as it relates to preparing these guys for the NBA draft is theoretically, on paper, better than going to play college basketball games. Other than, maybe you could make the case that they're not going to be playing in big-time, high-pressure situations that they would be playing in potentially in March Madness and things like that. And they're missing out on some experiences there. But other than that, there's really no downside for players like this. And that's the other point that I want to make here, and that's kind of why this doesn't have as big of an effect on the NCAA as you might think. This is only a path that's going to be viable for like 3 to 4 kids a year. This is not going to be a thing where 20 players every single year are going to play in the G League. At least that's not what I think is going to happen. This is only a viable path for really elite high school players. Like, if Zion Williamson was in the class of 2023, he wouldn't be going to college anymore, assuming that this works out, right? And so what that means for the NCAA is that, yes, they're going to be missing out on a couple of really talented players that they would have had in college, right? But that, again, that's not necessarily a bad thing as we kind of transition into talking about the NCAA here, because these players showing up and then leaving after a year isn't necessarily good for college basketball. So yes, you're taking off, that top layer of players, those elite talents, those Zion Williamson type players away from the college game. And yes, the interest would have been lower in college basketball had Zion not been there last year. But there's still a lot of players in college that are really good, and those players are more often going to be sticking around for more than one season. And so that all in all is good for college basketball rather than bad. So I don't want to talk too much about college basketball because that's not really what y'all are here for on this channel, right? Let's talk about the NBA and the NBA draft. If this turns out to be a situation where the 2021 NBA draft rolls around, which is expected to be a very good class, by the way, and these two guys, Jalen Green and Isaiah Todd, are supposed to be really, really high picks, and they end up being high picks, and they end up being really good players, that increases the viability of this option as an alternative path to getting to the NBA outside of just going to college immensely. That increases the viability of this whole situation a ton. Now, if these guys flame out, it doesn't necessarily ruin it, but it definitely pumps the brakes on this idea that we're going to be seeing 5 to 6 players every single year taking advantage of this option. Having said all those things, there's a couple of reasons why this is a huge deal. One, I honestly believe that this is going to result in more good NBA players right away out of the draft. Like, there's no way that it can be a bad thing that these guys, assuming that the program is set up properly, which I'm assuming that it will be, there's no way it can be a bad thing for these guys to be in a professional environment from a development standpoint, from just living their lives standpoint, learning how to live their lives as an adult rather than a college student, right? There's no way that can be a bad thing. And it's also just interesting that the NBA directly competed with the NCAA for once, because traditionally they've been pretty wary to do that. They don't want to directly compete with the NCAA. They want to build a good relationship with the NBA and with the NCAA. And this directly damages that because they're financially competing for high school prospects, which has never been a thing ever since they didn't allow high school players to come into the NBA anymore. And again, that goes back to this point earlier where people saying, oh, this is going to be the end of the NCAA. When players were going straight from high school to the NBA, college basketball was fine and it was still up and running and things were still, completely fine. People were still watching college basketball a ton. That's essentially what we're going to be seeing here is players that are that level of talented in high school that they can go straight to the NBA. They're going to be doing that. They're just going to be going straight to the G League. And I think that this is all a good thing for the prospect for the team and in the long run for the NCAA as well. Because one of the main arguments against having high school players come to the NBA straight away and, instituting this one and done rule where you had to be at least a year removed from high school, one of the main reasons for that being implemented was because these players would come from high school to the NBA and they would sit at the end of the bench and there was no development opportunity or they weren't ready to live in an adult life. And there were just way too many flameouts, way too many guys that were incredibly talented high school players that didn't work out. Yes, there were a ton of guys that ended up being successful and some of them being the best players that we've ever seen in the NBA, but the majority of them, it didn't work out. And so this pathway allows for so much more focus on the player and making sure that they're good so that they can eventually long-term positively impact the team rather than the other way around. So this is absolutely going to be a good thing. And so moving forward, I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that we look back on in 5 to 10 years and realize that these events kind of change the way that we look at players coming into the NBA and, potentially skipping college. Because up to this point, the momentum had kind of been building with players going overseas to playing in Australia and playing in China, things like that. And the NBA realized, okay, we don't want that. We want these guys staying home. It's never worked out incredibly well for any of these players that's gone overseas. Like, they've still been drafted relatively high, but they're not ready for the NBA, things like that. And this makes so much more sense as long as the compensation is increased at this point, because this is a program that's been in place for a few years, but the compensation was supposed to be like $100,000 to $125,000. Obviously, it's much more for these guys. And if the NBA is serious about financially competing with overseas opportunities as well as potential compensation you receive in college, this is going to be a real thing, and players are going to take this opportunity to develop in a professional environment. And as long as the players work out and they, develop properly, they become really good NBA players, there's no reason this isn't going to be not only a viable option, but the number one option for elite high school players moving forward completely. Like, they're not going to go to college. They're going to go straight to the G League. And I don't know how many players it's going to be. I would imagine it's only going to be 5 or 6 every year, but I could be wrong. But at the end of the day, it's cool. It's interesting. but it's not the end of the NCAA. And I know that people just want to jump on that bandwagon and say, this is the end. The NCAA is awful. You can have that opinion if you want to, but in this situation, it's just simply wrong. The NCAA is going to be fine. College basketball is going to be fine. 99.9% of the players in college, this is not applicable for them. They're going to go to school. They're going to do the regular thing, and they're going to come into the NBA out of college like everybody else has for the last 50 years, right? So it's interesting. It's potentially game-changing, but it doesn't ruin the NCAA by any means. But there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.